Veteran of Vascular Society of Kerala. Today,
Sir, Tom works in
we are discussing three topics. Today's head of Department of Vascular Surgery and Gastro from Amrita Hospital. Before moving to Sudhindran, we have an eminent faculty of a teacher of surgery in Kerala. We have Dayan Babu sir. So I request Babu sir to say 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Babu sir, 2 minutes.
No, nothing. I felt that vascular surgery, your society is doing very well. I am happy to see Sudhi and Unikishan sir over here. And you are doing good academic work. And today's topic also is very, very interesting, especially the diabetic foot, which is nothing but the bread and butter of a general surgeon, and what we can do about diabetic foot, especially the distal occlusions and the newer methods of management is going to be very interesting for the general surgeon. And I know that we have only very limited number of vascular surgeons, specialized vascular surgeons in the state. So I'm very happy to say a few words as introduction for today's webinar. Thank you, Sri Kumar, for asking me to say a few words.
Thank you, sir. I am handing the mic to Dr. Sudhindran for conducting the sessions. Sudhi? Sudhi? Or shall we start? Oh, Sudhi was traveling.
While he's coming, sir, shall we quickly just...
Yeah, so it's Sudhi is traveling from hospital to home. He'll be joining in a few minutes. So, diabetic foot per se is often...
He's here, sir. He's here.
Pardon?
Sudhindra sir has joined, sir.
Yes. Sorry, I just missed a little bit.
Yeah, please. Inauguration over. You can start now. Mic to Sudhi, please.
Okay. So we've got a very interesting, very important topic, particularly for MS students as well. I think to start off, we have Binny, who's going to talk about diabetic foot. So I think Binny, you can start off.
Okay.
The discussion.
Right. Excellent.
Binny, you can unmute and start.
Am I audible?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Can you go to full screen? Yes.
Yeah. So, first of all, let me thank Vascular Society of Kerala for granting me this opportunity to present a very common problem, ischemic diabetic foot, and the controversies associated with it. Diabetic foot is a very common problem where every surgeon will be dealing with. Okay. Okay, this is a very common picture of a very common patient. Every one of us is called to treat. So in my talk, I'm not actually going to all the details of ischemic diabetic foot. Rather, I will try to compare diabetic ischemia with non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. There are are they actually true different entities or are they same? This is the question which is there in everybody's mind. Those who have treated non-diabetic PAD will truly agree that there are some differences between the two entities. I'll first start with the epidemiology. The global estimate of diabetes in 2007 is 246 million, and the projected estimate by 2025 is 380 million, where India is having 77 million diabetic patients now, and we are second only to China. We are projected to overtake China by 2030. And peripheral arterial disease in the general population, irrespective of diabetes or non-diabetes, is 2.6% in below 50 years. When it's more than 70 years, it increases to more than 7% of the population. According to the Framingham study, heart study, approximately 20% of symptomatic PAD has diabetes. But this grossly underestimates the prevalence of PAD in diabetic patients due to various reasons, which I will come to later. Diabetic patients have 15 times higher risk of lower extremity amputation than general population. The risk of amputation is 5-fold higher in diabetic peripheral arterial disease compared to non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. So this itself tells that there is some difference between the two. The diabetes and smoking together account for more than 50% of the risk of peripheral arterial disease. Majority of the studies have confirmed high incidence of blood glucose levels, coronary artery disease, peripheral neuropathy, and hypertension in diabetic PAD. The first three, probably all of us will be expecting. But there is strikingly, most of the studies have shown a higher incidence of hypertension in diabetic peripheral arterial disease. Probably this indicates there is a systemic inflammatory response to diabetes in the general vascular tree. 40% of the diabetic PAD die within the next 5 years. Actual estimate is 36 to 40%. The death was more frequent in cases with total occlusions, a history of hypertension, and amputations. Diabetic peripheral arterial disease showed a higher mortality and died at an younger age, on an average 8 years, than non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. There is a poor survival for peripheral arterial disease in general compared to the general population. Going to the clinical features, early detection of diabetic PAD may be complicated by the presence of peripheral neuropathy and medial arterial calcification. These are the two things which is going to make it different from a non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. There's a silent majority of patients with low ABI, angle brachial index, but no claudication. This is probably due to the neuropathy most of them are suffering from. Generally, they present vague symptoms compared to the classical claudication in non-diabetic PAD patients presents with, like fatigue, difficulty to walk, etc. These are the terms they may most often use. Rest pain is also comparatively less in diabetic peripheral arterial disease. Diabetic PAD tend to have more foot ulcers and gangrene than non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. Diabetic PAD were found to have significantly smaller incidence of aortoiliac and femoral disease, and there is greater incidence of below-knee disease with palpable popliteal and absent distal pulses. This finding most of us have observed in our clinical practice. But it is not true to say that there is no proximal disease in diabetic PAD. But the incidence of distal PAD is comparatively higher compared to non-diabetic PAD. There is a higher incidence of coronary artery disease, peripheral neuropathy, and hypertension among diabetic PAD. This I told in the epidemiology also. The diabetic PAD showed a slightly higher trend towards microvascular complications, namely retinopathy and nephropathy. And also there is a higher incidence of ischemic heart disease. Chronic kidney disease requiring dialysis was found to be significantly higher in diabetic peripheral artery disease. This is another problem all of us will be facing when we treat diabetic foot infections. Most of them are on dialysis. Angle brachial pressure index. This is a very common screening test done in diabetic patients. And according to American Diabetic Association, all diabetic patients with more than 50 years of age should undergo a screening ABI measurement, which is repeated every 5 years. When the age is less than 50 years, they should undergo ABI. They have additional risk factors like smoking, hypertension, dyslipidemia, etc. And irrespective of age, any symptomatic patient also should undergo angle brachial index. An ABI more than 1.3 is quite common in diabetic PAD, and it suggests poorly compressible angle vessels due to medial calcification in diabetes. Neuropathy and medial calcification actually complicate the diagnosis of ischemia in diabetes. In these cases, you can actually go for toe systolic pressure, actual toe systolic pressure measurement, or transcutaneous partial pressure of oxygen measurement. That is also helpful. The classical gold standard preoperative workup is angiography. The classical DSA or X-ray angiography, as we call it, is now totally replaced by peripheral CT angiogram, acquired with multi-detected CT scan with dual source. Ideally, a 360 MD-CT will be an ideal investigation of choice. With an excellent preoperative imaging can be done with this if the provided the renal function is fine. This is another area where we are dealing with problem in diabetic ischemic disease, where a lot of them are having chronic renal failure, where the creatinine will be high and will be having difficulty to do peripheral CT angiography. MRI or color Doppler is another option, which has its own, both of them have its own limitations. On angiography, there is an increased incidence of distal vessel involvement in diabetic PAD. So large number of studies are there comparing diabetic and non-diabetic angiographies, where they have found that popliteal, posterior tibial, anterior tibial, and peroneals were preferentially involved compared to the proximal leg segments. Increased proximal leg segment involvement was seen in non-diabetic PAD, that is aortoiliac and femoral segments. Moderate to severe stenosis is seen in diabetic PAD with relatively lower incidence of occlusions. This same finding is there in non-diabetic PAD also. There is also, if you take the total number of ischemic patients, moderate to severe stenosis is more than total occlusions. Unstable and mixed plaques are seen in diabetic PAD compared to non-diabetic PAD, which are more vulnerable for rupture and ulceration. Diabetes-induced atherosclerosis was observed to be multi-stage, widespread, and beaded changes in the distal segment. The proximal segment, if you take the proximal segment alone, the only vessel which was preferentially involved in diabetic ischemic disease was profunda femoris. This was the first study which highlighted King et al. 1984. This fact just been validated by many other studies in the upcoming years. The typical finding, angiographic finding, you will see in a diabetic, there is a multiple lower segment involvement with beaded appearance. and popliteal and the distal vessels are generally preferentially involved. Going to the pathology, histology of atherosclerotic lesions of the lower extremities seem to have same morphology and distribution in both diabetic and non-diabetic. Differences are often found only in the occurrence of calcification of the media, which is called Monckeber's sclerosis, which is more common in diabetic PAD. This is the reason for an erroneously elevated angle brachial index in diabetic PAD. Diabetic microangiopathy of the lower limb arterioles and capillaries characterized by PAS positive hyaline material in the wall was first described by Goldenberg, 1958. This has been largely refuted by subsequent studies, and now generally it is thought that there is no microangiopathy in diabetic foot. But there is retina and kidney, there is an existence of microangiopathy. The pro-atherogenic changes associated with diabetes include increased vascular inflammation, derangements in the cellular components, as well as alteration in the blood cells and hemostatic factors. These changes lead to something called accelerated atherosclerosis with poor outcome. So this is the classical atheroma you will see in the vessel, which is mainly intimal and subintimal, lot of lipid, fibrin, form cells. But in a diabetic patient, you will see the medial calcification, that is the blue thing, medial calcification, which is largely called Monckeber's sclerosis, which is seen less in non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. Coming to the outcome of treatment, I'm not actually going to the intricacies of treatment because there are two more speakers to deal with that. The diabetic PAD end up in more foot preserving amputations, that is distal to the midfoot, than non-diabetic, and also more repeat amputations. This was found to be statistically significant in many studies. In diabetic PAD, revascularization was often performed with the aim of limiting the level of amputation and promote healing of stump of the amputation. It's very important. Many often vascular surgeons resist to do distal bypasses in view of poor results. Many often people try to do it to limit amputation and to improve healing of the stump. So I have read few studies which actually say that revascularization has not improved the amputation rates in diabetic patients. But actually, if you consider this fact, those observations can be challenged, because the idea of revascularization in diabetic foot is many a times to improve the outcome in terms of level of amputation and healing of the stump. The cost of revascularization was found to be higher in diabetic PAD, often requiring re-interventions. 36% of diabetic PAD die within the next 5 years. Death was found more frequent in cases of total occlusions, a history of hypertension, and amputations. Death in diabetic PAD occur at a younger age, on average 8 years, than non-diabetic PAD. Let me conclude the topic. Arterial disease in diabetes can be rightly called accelerated atherosclerosis. The diagnosis of PAD poses some challenges due to the peculiarity of the disease. This is in terms of neuropathy and medial calcification and distal distribution of the disease. They tend to affect the distal vascular segments than the proximal. Pathologically, the disease is not different from non-diabetic except for medial arterial calcification. They end up in more foot preserving amputations than non-diabetic. The cost of treatment and re-interventions are much higher. They have got a 5-year mortality rate more than non-diabetic peripheral arterial disease. With this conclusion, let me conclude my topic. Thank you all for the patient listening.
Binny,
Sir?
thank you very much for that. Binny, thank you very much. Very succinctly presented.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhi.
Should we take the questions now, or Siddharth, how do you want
We'll
to
go in
start?
the last, sir, because all the topics are related. So we'll go to the next topic. Next talk.
Okay. So next topic is by Dr. Ranjish. So I think Binny has already talked about the possible possibility of doing distal bypasses, but there is a common belief or misconception that bypasses in diabetic patients are not useful because they've got distal disease. Therefore, even if you do a bypass, it doesn't work. Therefore, the best thing is to go for amputation. That is a misconception that has been carried on from ages, from very popular teachers as well. It has been done, but we now know that that is not true. And so today we have Dr. Ranjish to talk about distal bypass in diabetic foot. Do they actually work? Ranjish, please carry on.
Dr. Ranjish has a recorded video. I'll just play it for him.
All right, okay.
Siddharth, Rajesh is there. You can do it directly.
He says he has connectivity issues. So you want to do live or? I'm not sure
Rajesh?
he's.
If the recorder is there, let's go for the record. That'll be better,
Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
Is it coming?
Can't see yet.
Just a sec.
Not coming. Yes.
Is it coming now? No.
Your main computer has come, but the PowerPoint presentation hasn't come. You can open
It's showing
the,
a folder, is it?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Fine, perfect. Yeah, make it slideshow.
I think it's a recorded version, so it should be.
Okay, so
played.
the audio is there as well?
Yeah, it should be.
Good
there.
evening, everyone.
Okay,
The
carry
topic
on. Yeah,
is
thank
on
you.
distal bypass. First, let us see what do we mean by distal bypass or distal disease. The lower limb arterial system is divided into segments like aortoiliac, iliofemoral, femoropopliteal, etc. And peripheral arterial disease can affect any of these segments.
Okay.
And when it affects the below knee vessels, we call it as distal disease. It's also known as infrapopliteal disease or infrageniculate disease. So what is the significance of this distal disease? Now, if you see this picture, the first three columns show an increased incidence of infrapopliteal disease. As age increases, the distal disease increases. There is also an increased involvement of distal disease in diabetes mellitus and CKD patients. So an elderly male patient with diabetes is more likely to have an infrapopliteal disease. As you know, the age of our population is increasing, and also we are the diabetic capital of the world. So we are faced more and more with this sort of disease pattern. Now, some points about diabetes and peripheral arterial disease. Microangiopathy, which is unique to diabetes, is not seen in peripheral arterial disease. The cause of lower extremity ischemia is similar in patients with or without diabetes, and it is accelerated atherosclerosis. The peculiarity in diabetes is that they're more likely to be affecting the infrapopliteal disease with a relative sparing of the peroneal artery and also the pedal arteries. And this peculiar pattern allows for a successful arterial reconstruction of these distal vessels. You see, this is a 48-year-old diabetic female who presented with a wet gangrene of her right little toe. On examination, she had a palpable popliteal but absent pedal pulses. So I was thinking of an infrapopliteal disease, and a belonie angioplasty was the plan. Angiogram showed a relatively normal SFA and popliteal artery. The first picture, you can see that the popliteal artery is normal, and below that, there was no non-branch or named branch going into the foot. It's all diffusely diseased vessels. And then, if you see the last part, you can see that the pedal arch is reformed. It is relatively clear. So I thought the dorsalis pedis artery was better, and a popliteal artery to dorsalis pedis artery bypass was planned. And the long saphenous vein was harvested from the ipsilateral thigh, and it was used as the conduit. The belonie popliteal artery was exposed and used as the inflow for the proximal anastomosis, and the dorsalis pedis artery in the foot was used as the outflow. This is the second month follow-up pic of this patient. The little toe amputation wound is healing well. The important principles of any arterial bypass are a good inflow, a good outflow, a good conduit, and a neat technique. So about good inflow. In the previous case that I showed you, the inflow was taken from a belonie popliteal artery. Here, the proximal anastomosis or inflow is to the common femoral artery. You can see the vein being anastomosed to the common femoral artery. To keep your vein bypass open, you need a good flow to the graft. If there is a proximal disease, there may be a compromise in the flow, and there is a high chance of failure of bypass. So this diagrammatic picture shows a bypass taken from the femoral artery to the posterior tibial artery. The inflow is from the common femoral artery, and the outflow is to the posterior tibial artery. This is the normal anatomy of belonie vessels. Depending on the disease pattern, the distal anastomosis can be done to any of these vessels: the anterior tibial artery, the posterior tibial artery, or the peroneal artery. Now, if you have to anastomose to the foot, you can take the dorsalis pedis artery as the outflow, or the posterior tibial artery behind the ankle as the outflow. The last part, you can see that the posterior tibial artery is divided into medial and lateral plantar artery, forming the pedal arch. The anastomosis can be even made to this plantar vessels. This I've shown you already, anastomosis to the dorsalis pedis. The another anastomosis to the posterior tibial artery. Now, a good vein as a conduit is a must for distal bypass. Prosthetic grafts are not used in tibial artery bypasses. Either the ipsilateral great saphenous vein or contralateral great saphenous vein is the most common conduit that we use. If it's not available, short saphenous vein can be used. And if all the veins in the lower limb are poor, you can even harvest the vein from the arm and can be used as the conduit. This is the long saphenous vein being harvested and anastomosed to the femoral artery. Okay, now let us see some angio pictures. Here you can see up to popliteal artery is okay, and then you only have the peroneal artery as a good vessel in the leg, and then the pedal artery arch can be seen. So this is very typical of diabetes. Here the popliteal artery is totally cut off. Just below the popliteal artery is totally cut off. Only collaterals can be seen, and then you have a faint trace of the dorsalis pedis artery. Here the option is to do a bypass graft from the popliteal artery to the dorsalis pedis artery. Here again, you can see the peroneal artery and the pedal arteries are the only ones seen, which is very typical of diabetes. Here even the peroneal artery has proximal diseases. And you can either do a plasty of the peroneal artery or do a bypass from the popliteal artery to the pedal vessels. Here again, you can see that the posterior tibial artery is faintly seen going up to the foot and forming the plantar arch. So if you are able to do an angioplasty of this posterior tibial artery, you may save the limb. If it fails, you have to do a bypass from the popliteal artery to the posterior tibial artery. Again, an angio which is very typical of diabetes, which I have been saying, with a relative sparing of the peroneal artery and the pedal vessels. Here again, if you see, the peroneal artery is the sole artery, and it is also deceased proximally. So in case of a minor illness, like a small area of gangrene or rust pain, you may get away with an angioplasty of the peroneal artery. But if the tissue loss is larger and you want a good flow to the foot, you may have to do a bypass from the popliteal artery to the pedal vessels. Now coming to the data, almost all of these data are somewhat old, and this is an article published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery, where more than 300 patients were followed up with an arterial bypass grafting to the dorsalis pedis artery, and you can see the secondary patency of almost 80% and the limb salvage rate of almost 90% at 5-year follow-up. There's another article where more than 1,000 bypasses to the dorsalis pedis artery was followed up, and over 5 years, the limb salvage is around 80%, and over 10 years, it is almost 60% of limb salvage rate. There's another article where the pedal bypass is compared to the peroneal artery bypass, where the peroneal artery was used as the outflow. And the results are comparable with almost more than 70% limb salvage rate. So the take-home message is that distal bypass is a good procedure to salvage limbs in case of a diffuse infrapopliteal disease. Good case selection is a must for long-term success of bypass. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjish. Again, a very succinct presentation. I think one of the issues that we used to face with distal bypasses, mainly two things. One is, as you rightly mentioned, a good quality conduit is a must for these bypasses. So if you don't have a good vein, I mean, we have the option of using a PTFE is not there in such distal bypass because they don't work well. So that is one issue. Second is the amount of tissue necrosis lower down is extensive. Sometimes it's very difficult to bypass right down to that area because the necrosed wound, etc., will be close by. And those are one of the common reasons why you're not often able to do the bypasses. And that is when this minimally invasive or angioplasty, etc., come below the knee joint. In the good old days, that was something which we never thought will work, because it will work for maybe a few weeks or months and then it will stop. But now we know that's not the case. They do very well. And so here we have Hari to talk about radiological interventions for below knee diseases. Hari Shankar is ready, I think. Can you start, Hari?
Yeah, hi, sir.
Yes, please carry on.
Hari, you wanted the slides to be projected?
Yeah, you can.
Is it visible?
It's visible. Can we go from above, from the first slide?
Yeah.
Hi, I'll be talking about, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are audible. Yes, you are. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be talking about endovascular interventions in the below the knee disease, and it has aptly been called a real game changer because of all the years we have been doing only bypasses, but for the last decade has shown revolutionary changes in endovascular intervention, and that's what we'll be talking about in a nutshell. Next slide, please. So some general considerations, it's usually associated with atherosclerosis disease, atherosclerosis, and all these patients, because of the multiple comorbidities, they have increased operative risk for any bypass for that matter. And that's why actually endovascular intervention came into limelight. And especially in India and more so in Kerala, with the increasing incidence of type 2 diabetes, up to 70% of patients with below the knee disease or infraportal disease have diabetes. And one another issue with these patients is that because of the extensive collateralization, unlike in FP disease and aortoiliac disease, they'll present to the surgeon or a vascular surgeon in a late stage. And one thing we have to tell the patients at the outset itself is that there will be a frequent need for re-intervention because of the disease pattern. Next. So the revascularization, be it endovascular or open surgery, is reserved for signs of impending loss. And the modern terminology which has come out for critical limb ischemia is chronic limb-threatening ischemia or CLTI. So any patient with rest pain, non-healing ulcers and gangrene will need revascularization of some sort. So avoidance of amputation is the main aim, be it an endovascular or open surgery. Next slide. So we have seen patients with FP disease and aortoiliac disease with disabling claudication, and we actually offer them some sort of treatment like endovascular or open surgery, but the same should be avoided in below the knee disease. The problem is that the patient might be a claudicant, but unsuccessful endovascular treatment because of any thrombosis or dissection or due to our procedural issues, the patient will be pushed into an acute limb loss situation. So the claudicant will become a critical limb ischemia, and amputation will be invited without any reason. Next. So a patient who presents to a OPD and who is not fit for a surgical revascularization because of his medical comorbidities, they have a very high risk of limb loss, up to 40 to 50% within 1 month if no revasc is achieved. So the latest studies have shown that angioplasty or PTA has a high limb salvage rate and primary patency rate of about 75%, especially in task C and D also. So earlier convention was that task A and B or the earlier lesions will be undergoing angioplasty, and C and D, which are more complex lesions, will undergo bypasses. But that is not true for a below the knee disease. And for the sake of the graduates, postgraduates, primary patency is when any procedure you do, a bypass or a endovascular intervention, if the limb, if you have managed to open up a vessel and it has stayed open, so without any intervention from your side after the primary intervention, it's called primary patency. That means it stays open without anything being done more. But secondary patency is when you have to do something before the thing gets failed, before the angioplasty or bypass gets failed. That's called secondary patency. Next. The problem with the task classification was that, which we use commonly for FP disease and aortoiliac, is that infrapopliteal disease was never addressed in that. And more so when diabetes is increasing, infrapopliteal disease has increased. So that is when the Journal of the Society of various societies from all over the world has come with what is known as GLASS staging or global anatomic staging system. And we are proud that our own senior Dr. Suresh from Jain Institute, Bangalore, has been one of the investigators for this thing. So now the interventions are based on GLASS staging rather than conventional task and other staging which has been there. Next. So as we all know, what are the advantages of angioplasty? It's a low risk procedure, minimally invasive. Most of the times, 9 out of 10 times the patient will be awake, and we give a local anesthesia at the area of puncture, and the patient will be knowing what is happening around. And it rarely compromises the later surgical procedure. And the important is that because of the comorbidities, he might need a bypass surgery, be it a coronary artery or a distal bypass. We'll be saving the GSP for that. And as I told, there's no need for anesthesia, and the patient will have a shorter hospital stay. Most of the time, he comes into the hospital, gets admitted, gets angioplasty, and will be discharged the next day. And repeat PTA is easy compared to surgery. Next. And for all these reasons, the endovascular has rightly been called the first treatment option in critical limb ischemia, especially in infrapopliteal disease. And surgical revasc nowadays is advised only if endovascular treatment has failed. Next. Disadvantages, mostly it is procedure related and the disease pattern related. We can cause dissection, and especially in diabetics and chronic kidney disease patients, there will be high restenosis as high as 70% in 2 years, and abrupt vessel closure. Once you do an angioplasty and come out, the moment itself the vessel will get recoil. It's called abrupt vessel closure. Then we have thrombus formation, embolization distally, or what is known as trash foot. And because of the calcification, as Minister told, even after angioplasty or bypass, the demonstrable hemodynamic improvement in ABI or TCPO2 is not seen in most of the patients. So those are the disadvantages. Techniques, it can be antegrade, which is the common wherein you take an inflow or a wire is inserted through the common femoral or superficial femoral artery. But there are times when the disease is so complex and so bad that we have to go retrograde. The picture shows that there is a sheath. The green thing is called the sheath, which has been inserted to the posterior tibial artery, and from there we will do revascularization from below up. So that's called retrograde. And another type is transluminal or subintimal. So if there is a channel, even if a very small one, we can attempt a transluminal angioplasty. But when the vessel is totally occluded, once you pass a wire, as you can see in the picture, the wire will take a path between the adventitia and the intima, and that will cause a dissection flap on its own, which we ourselves create, and then we do plasty and plaster the thrombus onto one of the walls. Next. So what is the toolbox for infraportability? Unlike bypass surgeries, we need a few hardware of our own. We need wire, what is important. So what is given is 035, 018 and 014 are inches. 014 inch wire. Most of them are hydrophilic, means to say that it has some sort of blood repellent property. And then catheters, we have different types of catheters, glide catheters, guiding catheters, which we'll use for this. Then we have balloons, which is the mainstay of angioplasty. And one of the main discovery or renovations was the development of long balloons. We have 10 centimeter, 12 centimeter, 15 centimeter balloons. And of late, what has come out is drug-eluting balloons, cutting balloons, cryoplasty balloons, which I'll be just touching upon later. Next. Other things include stents, drug-eluting stents, biodegradable stents. Then what has come off late is atherectomy, wherein, as the name suggests, we actually kind of break the thrombus or the lesion using a laser or a diamond-coated orbital thing or a directional cutting kind of thing. So this is called atherectomy, means that we simply cut through the thrombus. Next. So these are some some pictures of the balloons. You can see the first one is a plain out balloon, and then on the right side up you can see the cutting balloon which has blade on its sides, and the downward you can see the polar catheter cryoplasty balloon. Next. As we know, the indications, the indication of benefits, it's readily available now. Balloons are inexpensive, and especially in India, we can reuse the balloons. We're bringing down the cost much. And it's most of the time for the below the knee disease, it goes on an 014 inch or 018 inch wire, which you'll understand later when you see. And then there is a high safety profile for the balloons compared to what used to be there before. Next. Limitations: the balloon can cause dissection. As I told, it can cause recoil. And sometimes, because of the pattern of the disease, there will be a need for a stent in as high as 35% of the patients. And when there is a lot of calcium in the lesion, the incomplete inflation of balloon will cause a inadequate opening up of the lesion. Next. So this was one of the inventions or renovations of balloons. There's something called long balloon. The first picture you can see the cutoff at the popliteal level. Afterwards, we have just managed to cross the lesion with a small balloon, and then we have put a 12 to 15 centimeter long balloon, and then we have plastered, and you can see a good result after that. Next. So this again another example for a short segment TP trunk occlusion or TP peroneal trunk occlusion, which has been plastered with a 3 millimeter by 80 millimeter balloon. 3 millimeter is the size and 80 is the length. 80 millimeter is the length of the balloon. Next. Now, compared to the results of an infrapopliteal disease, as I told that the restenosis rate, that means the rate at which the lesion remains open is very less. So the restenosis is high. So primary patency is counted at 1 year, unlike bypasses. So technical success rate almost we have achieved 100% nowadays, and the primary patency at 1 year is around 80%, which is comparable to distal bypass. And at 2 years, it's again 50 to 78%, again comparable to distal bypass. So limb salvage rate also at 1 year is very high, at up to 90%. So it means to say that infrapopliteal PTA has similar result of limb salvage compared to bypass surgery. Next. Problem with a direct comparison between a PTA or angioplasty and surgery is that most of the patients who come for an intervention maybe either claudicant or critical limb ischemia. So most of the cohort is a mixed bag. And again, as I told, especially CKD patients, so chronic kidney disease and diabetes patients, after angioplasty, that the improvement in AVI and duplex studies is not very reliable because of the calcification and vessel non-compliance. Next. What's new? As I told, in the armamentarium for angioplasty of a vascular surgeon, what has come up is a cutting balloon. Next. Cutting balloons which have which have 3 or 4 surgical blades which are attached to the normal balloon, and which will actually cut through the non-yielding lesion. Next. It causes less dissection, and it is effective in resistant and complex lesions, and it was invented or it was innovated for opening up the restenosis in bypass or anastomosis of the bypass surgeries, which are relatively very resistant to opening up. So you can see one of the examples. On the right side, you can see an arrow mark which shows a non-yielding lesion after angioplasty with a normal balloon. So a second picture shows a cutting balloon, and we can see third picture opening up of the lesion. Next. Next one is which has come up is a drug-eluting balloon. So as you know, the stents were the next big thing after balloons in all the angioplasties in coronary or in peripheral angioplasty situation. So stents had their own problems because stents used to get occluded fast. So then came the concept of drug-eluting or drug-coated balloon, wherein they caught non-proliferative agents or anti-proliferative agents like paclitaxel, sirolimus, and everolimus, and that will be kept at the lesion so that the restenosis is decreased drastically. So that is the DEB or DCB. Next. So a lot of trials have looked into the patency and efficacy of these balloons. The latest one, which is actually ongoing, is the BASIL 2 trial, BASIL 3 trial, then SWEET PAD trial, BEST CLA trial, IMPACT BTK, DEBATE BTK2. A lot of trials are there, all showing good results with these drug-eluting balloons. Next. So then I told this is the stent, not very commonly used in below-the-knee disease because, as I told, stents can get occluded. It can be a self-expandable stent wherein the stent itself will get opened up inside the system, and you need to blast it from within using a balloon to get the original size. Then the second type is a balloon expandable stent, wherein the stent is mounted on a balloon, and once you open the balloon, the stent gets deployed automatically. So balloon expandable is is used when you need a very precise positioning of a stent, and self is usually used when you need a long stent. Next. And stent in the below the knee disease, what we have been using were a coronary stent because the diameter of the vessel used to be the same or similar to similar to a coronary artery, and the primary patency at 1 year is up to 65 to 75% with the advent of dedicated infrapopliteal stents. Next. This is the atherectomy device. There are a lot of types of atherectomy devices: laser-based, rotablator-based, Silver Hawk. Silver Hawk is a direction or a, it just, you can see the picture when it has just cut through the thrombus or the plaque. So these are atherectomy devices. Next. So these are used for complex and chronic total occlusions and long lesions with calcification wherein the balloons fail to open up the lesion. So these are the times when atherectomy is used. Next. One example, you can see the cutoff of the above knee popliteal in the first picture, and you can see the atherectomy device inside. And after the atherectomy is done, yes, you can see the near normal vessel in the third picture. This one is a cryoplasty balloon similar to atherectomy. Again, I'm not going into detail. These are all the latest advance in the angioplasty, I wanted to say. Next. Few case scenarios. This patient who was a 52-year-old diabetic came with an infected heel gangrene, you can see. And the arrows in the second picture shows long segment posterior tibial occlusion. And in the below one, you can see the posterior tibial is not visualized at all. No pedal arch is seen. Next. So we have managed to cross the lesion. There's a long 2.5 millimeter diameter and 15 centimeter long balloon inside the posterior tibial. And once the plasty is done, you can see a nicely formed pedal arch. And the ulcer got healed. This is a second patient, again a 54-year-old diabetic CKD with a gangrenous first and second amputation is very common. Outside somebody would have done a first and second amputation. Then we get to know that the stump is not healing. You can see in the first picture, you can see left side, posterior tibial has a abrupt cutoff in the lowermost part above the calcaneum. Next. So we managed to cross the lesion and plasty it with a long balloon again. But on the right side above, you can see there is a recoil. That's what's known as a recoil. And the flow through the posterior tibial was not good. So what we did is we deployed a 2.75 millimeter and into 40 balloon expandable stent. And the last picture we can see a brisk runoff of posterior tibial with good opening and improved foot collaterals. Next. You can see the healed foot at 1 month. So that was the drastic difference after deployment of stent. Next. 64-year-old diabetic, CKD on dialysis. This patient had a lateral heel ulcer, painful, deprived elsewhere, became ischemic and gangrenous. So came to us. So we took a DSA. You can see the anteritibial and posterior tibial artery are occluded soon after their origins. And in the leg, there are only collaterals, poor runoff of the vessels, and no pedal arch is seen. Next. So this patient underwent, even after repeated attempts, we could not cross the lesion into the posterior tibial. So what we did is we took a puncture in the lower posterior tibial just above the medial malleolus, and a wire has been passed retrograde. So the first picture shows a wire which has come from down through the posterior tibial up into the knee joint, and the above one which is seen there is a sheath. So the wire has been passed into the sheath and it will be brought outside into the femoral artery, the groin, and then we will plasty it. So the second picture shows the balloon which has been used for plastying the lesion after crossing. Next. So this is the final result. You can see antitibial was passed, the antitibial artery and posterior tibial artery nicely opened up, and you can see good vessels in the angle. Next. Our experience, as we started, bypass was the mainstay, and gradually as the disease pattern also has evolved, posterior the angioplasty has increased in numbers and the bypass have come down. This year we have done around 93 angioplasties and 31 bypasses. Next. This is you can see the drastic difference in the angioplasty and bypass pattern. Next. So to summarize, endovascular first is the present dictum in patients with infrapopliteal or BTK or below the knee disease having chronic limb-threatening ischemia because it's safe, it has excellent safety profile, and re-intervention is possible for these patients owing to the multiple medical comorbidities. So this is one of the recent studies which have told that. So that's what Save Limbs, Save Lives is a vast initiative. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hari. That's very nice. There are quite a few questions in the chat box. We'll go through them one by one. Dr. Srilal is asking, what is the
Before we go to the questions,
post-
shall we, sorry, sir, shall we announce the winners for the last
Yes.
quiz?
Yeah, sure. Okay,
So
go
I'll
on.
just put
Go
up
on
the
to that.
slide, sir. 1 sec. Yeah, so last time we had a session on peripheral arterial disease, but was focusing on the proximal vessels, the iotoiliac and the femoropopliteal segment. And we had the quiz at the end of the topic, on the end of the session, and our prize winners are Dr. Chinu from Amrita Institute and Dr. Vimal from Sri Chitra Institute. Both of them get an award of 2,500 rupees for winning the quiz. So we have a quiz this time as well. The quiz, I think, will be published in the chat box at the end of the session. So all of you must try.
Congratulations, Chinu and Vivek. Vimal?
I don't think they're here, sir.
They're not here. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so shall we go to the questions in the chat box then?
Yes, yes, sir.
So Dr. Srilal is asking, what is the post-operative protocol after distal bypass? I guess he's referring to anticoagulation and antiplatelets. Vinny, do you want to answer first? Vinny?
Yeah. After distal bypass.
Yes.
After distal bypass, definitely patient should have antiplatelets. Preferentially dual antiplatelet for initial months, 3 months or more. And if you have a doubtful result of revascularization, anticoagulation also can be added. So that is the practice we generally follow. If a revascularization result is questionable, anticoagulation with warfarin is added. Otherwise, if a good pulse, dual antiplatelet is continued for about a year, and then we switch on to aspirin alone. I should
the difference
less of distal bypasses. I have more of femoropopliteal or femoral to below knee popliteal. In this case, this is my protocol. We do less of distal bypass.
Shall I add one
protocol?
Shall I add one point to Binny's? I think a correct answer what Binny's practice is. I just want to add the new trial, COMPASS trial, with the NOACs, newer oral anticoagulation. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, sir. Carry on. Yes.
So now, because the VARF also, we don't have to keep a very high PTINR 2 or 3 times. What we need is with NOAC 2.5 milligrams BD with ecosprin. But generally with rivaroxaban or Novax, I add only clopidogrel because ecosprin anticoagulation, even though it's minimal dose, there's more of GI bleed can be there. So that I think, because it's got multiple advantages, that will help the patency of the graft. Second, many of them will have cardiac problem. So the cardiac protection also is very much there. There is a 35% decrease in amputations and 20% decrease in mortality from cardiac. So I think that is something worth considering, provided the patient can afford the money. Otherwise, anticoagulation, when you have a single outflow or a not very good pulse is achieved, I think anticoagulation with the addition of clopidogrel will be better. Good pulse, good result. I think ecosprin alone or dual for some time, as Binny said.
So you mean rivaroxaban 2.5 milligram BD?
Yeah. Actually, rivaroxaban actual dose like anticoagulation is 20 milligrams a day, then go for 15 milligrams and all that. Now, many orthopedicians use 10 milligrams rivaroxaban for various other like DVT and venous thromboembolism. But the COMPASS trial is the one now, it's world over, they are practicing 2.5 twice daily with ecosprin. That decreases the limb loss by 35% and life the cardiac mortality is reduced by 25%. So it's become a very standard protocol. A little bit of monetary problem is there. Now the 140 rupees tablet rivaroxaban, now it's about 70 rupees. The representative will deliver home at 50 rupees. So I think it's still, I am able to convince, not the patients are not many. When yesterday I saw one patient, IOTOP-FEM, the pulses were only 2 to 3 plus, because he had once, he came with a foot drop, he could not stand on his feet. So the pulse is not great. So now it's about 6 months. Now the bleeding chance is not there. I put him on 10 milligrams of rivaroxaban and clopidogrel 75. So that, he's 51 years. So he has got another 20, 30 years to go. It's better to anticoagulate when things are not looking very good. And I had to do a fasciotomy. He had foot drop continuing. Now he's able to walk. It took about.
What about dabigatran? Will you test dabigatran?
Dabigatran is antithrombin. This is the factor 10A. Both are equivalent. Both are equivalent.
What is the dose of dabigatran you suggest?
Dabigatran problem is that there is no trial with the small dose of 2.5 BD, which means blood is getting slightly thin. It's not a proper anticoagulation. Dabigatran is 150, 110, 75. 75 milligrams may be a little softer for anticoagulation. So for peripheral vascular disease, when we have done a reasonable angioplasty or surgery, good to have a gentle anticoagulation with the clopidogrel. That will improve the patency, have cardiac mortality reduced, amputation rate reduced in a very immense one-third decrease in amputation. I think this has already come in. Recently, it's in practice in West. I think in some of our vascular colleagues also, they are practicing like this.
Evidence
Thank you, sir.
For dabigatran.
I think we'll go to the next question. The question from Dr. Sunil S. is, for infrapopliteal disease, what is the choice of revascularization? Is it endovascular first always, or is it only if the patient is medically unfit, endovascular? So, Hari, what do you think? I mean, would you try endovascular first for all patients, or only if they're medically unfit? Because we do know that the patency rate is probably better with surgical bypass compared to. So, what is your choice?
So these young patients, medically fit, definitely should undergo bypass. That is become everywhere actually.
Yeah.
So if they have other medical comorbidities which actually preclude a bypass, that's only when you go for an angioplasty in younger patients. Otherwise, older patients, multiple comorbidities, always endovascular first. But young patients, definitely we should go for a bypass.
Yeah, so they're medically fit, and if there's a good vein, etc.
Good vein, etc.
Young, probably go for a bypass.
Yeah, but yours can see.
Bad. Thank you for that. Now, there's another question which I didn't understand. After CABG, if artery is more than 90%, can you do angioplasty? This is Dr. Shyam. I'm not sure what he meant.
Whether he's referring to coronary artery or is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess.
Sir. Hello.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Shyam Gupta. Go on. What was the question? What did you mean by that?
Sir, means a CABG done 10 years before, then I got a angiography, and there was declared that your artery is more than 90% stenosis.
Which artery?
Actually, I forget it, sir. Next program, I will tell you the documentation.
So if there's only the angiographic finding, then I don't know. Obviously, if there is any distal disease, only if there is either rest pain or tissue necrosis, we'll go ahead with the angioplasty. Normally, just the finding of an stenosis, we may not do anything. I don't know what is the question was. So, okay, we'll go to the next one. How will you follow from Srilal? That's a good question. How will you follow up the patient to assess the patency after endovascular technique? So maybe Dr. Binny can answer that.
Yeah, this after endovascular is a good tool is the angle pressure, absolute angle pressure or ABI. If you get a good triphasic flow at the angle level, that is good enough. With any ABI more than 0.5 can definitely heal the problem. But a good triphasic flow or even a biphasic flow when preoperative it was monophasic will actually be good enough to bet on a healing.
Yeah, so clinical examination and of course the handheld Doppler forms part of the clinical examination. And then of course duplex scan will almost always tell you whether the graft is patent or not. So only if you find that the healing is not proper or there is some other problem will you go for an invasive like CT or MRI angio thing. Otherwise usually clinical examination followed by duplex scan. Next question. What is the ideal time to do the amputation in ischemic limb with wet gangrene before or after revascularization? So, Hari, do you want to answer that?
Sir, wet gangrene, any source of infection should be removed first, even before any bypass or endovascular intervention. So, a patient obviously pouring pus should not be waited for a endovascular procedure. So, he should undergo a removal of the focus of infection followed by endovascular procedure. But if the gangrene, most of the times when it's dry, we can wait on it. If he only has ischemic rest pain, the patient should undergo intervention, that is angioplasty, followed by the amputation. So if it's wet, infection is there, definitely remove that first and then followed by angioplasty.
Thank you. So basic surgical principles: get rid of the focus of infection first. That's the most important thing. Once you do that, then you reassess and plan for revascularization subsequently. So any, but of course, if you talk about big, major amputations like below knee or above knee, I guess you could probably wait, get the debridement done, the local debridement done, get the focus off, and then reassess for revascularization before you go for a major amputation. But if you think only major amputation can be done, then we're afraid. I'm afraid we can't do anything much. Dr. Sibin Mohammad's question: what are the chances of small lumen distal vessels getting occluded due to plaque debris released during angioplasty? Is that a problem? Referring to arteries in general and not only to food. Hari, that's a good question.
It's definitely one of the complications or one of the possible effects of angioplasty is the throwing of what's known as trashing. But it's not. The studies have shown that the same is not very significant enough to cause acute limb or occlusion of the distal vessels because of the same showering of the emboli, what we call. But if that occurs in a very large amount, causing a significant occlusion of the digital arteries, causing occlusion and worsening what was already there, then it's a problem. But of course, it's a problem. But most of the times, the lesions are hard and they just get plastered onto the walls rather than throwing or getting showered distally. But if there is an acute component, means the patient has an acute clot along with the chronic thrombus, these acute things will go down, can go down. So that is definitely not it's a problem, but not very commonly causing issues.
Thank you for that. So these are risks that must be explained to the patient.
Yes.
You know that there are risks associated with it.
Yes.
And but then of course the risk of this is much less than the risk of the patient losing the limb. So just like everything else. I think that's it. There are no more questions. There was an excellent session. Thank you all the speakers. It's very, very short. And yeah, sorry, somebody is on the line.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, Sunil. Yeah, go on, Sunil. Yes, Sunil.
It's about that query about distal bypass, because the concern would have been because previously we used to regularly add anticoagulation for all our patients who underwent distal bypass, because warfarin was a protocol for all distal bypass cases initially. But over years, we have learned that actually that's not needed. Now we add only antiplatelets after good distal bypass. We hardly add anticoagulation. And actually, I got some difference of opinion about this dabigatran and rivaroxaban. These are added not to increase patency of bypass. Actually, these are added to improve the cardiovascular, decrease the cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. That is actually nothing to do with the patency of distal bypasses, basically. So we used to add warfarin acetone, but nowadays we are actually not adding those in most patients, but only in select patients where we feel the outflow is a little bad. So we add anticoagulation till the ulcer heals and not lifelong in this type of bypasses, basically. That I think that thing needed a clarity. That's why I just made a comment on this. Probably Ranjish can add something more if he is online about the protocols after distal bypass.
Yeah, Ranjish, are you on?
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi,
Yeah,
sir.
what is your protocol following distal bypasses regarding anticoagulation?
So as Dr. Sunil said, we used to add warfarin or some anticoagulation initially, and then the follow-up, as you know, in our setup is very difficult with warfarin. So we changed on to antiplatelets initially, and dual antiplatelets for 3 to 6 months, and once the wound heals, change into single antiplatelet ecospirin. But what is happening recently is that after these GLASS guidelines and coming up of newer oral anticoagulants like rivaroxaban and dabigatran, rivaroxaban is a difficult thing because of the cost. So nowadays my protocol is I'll add clopidogrel and dabigatran for at least 3 to 6 months, and then stop the dabigatran and continue with single antiplatelet, either clopidogrel or ecospirin. This is what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I think essentially as Unikasa mentioned, all these peripheral vascular disease, they're part of a systemic disease, and most of the mortality is because of MI or stroke. So, which is what the composite also shows. That is for patients with stable cardiovascular disease. Their mortality is because of stroke or MI is decreased if you give them rivaroxaban 2.5 mg BD plus 100 milligram aspirin. So only issue is the expense, and it's very, very expensive because 2.5 milligram, 5 milligram, 10 milligram, all of them cost the same. That's the way they're actually marketing it. But you're right. I mean, as Sunil said, it may not improve the patency of the graft per se, but the overall mortality is less, and maybe because the cardiac function is better, they may have a better patency as well. We don't know. So,
May I add a little bit? See, the point is, if the end result is good, you have a very good pulse, good situation, there is only need for dual antiplatelets for some time switching on to single. But when all the time you will not get a 4+ pulse or an ABI 1:1 in difficult cases like this, where they have some iliac disease, some tibial disease, single outflow. So there, this will directly benefit to reduce the amputation rate. Plus, as Dr. Sudhindran agreed, it helps in preventing the conducted clots which will come up in cardiac and carotid vessels, so that the overall mortality stroke is reduced. So it's not mandatory to put new oral anticoagulants, but the dosage is only like equivalent to 1.5:1. The INRPT is achieved by this 2.5 ED. That keeps, if at all there's worsening, there will not be a propagated thrombus back and forth occluding the collaterals. So it keeps a slight blood thinning effect, and that helps all over the body, as you rightly said, because it's a systemic disease, and that is a reflection of, the leg problem is only one part which is more, but they may have LMCA disease, LAD disease. So the impact of a rupture of the plaque or embolism, it will be curtailed by this neo oral anticoagulants. It's not mandatory, selected patients. But the study shows that it does help in reducing amputation significantly, and cardiac and stroke mortality almost like 25-30%. So I think if affordable, now the 140 rupee tablet is 70 rupees per. Now it is further going to come down, and in our case, the representative is giving for 50 rupees. They deliver at home. So if you want to sustain heart and a cardiac problem, and if you want to improve the patency and improve the circulation, 50 rupees is worth it. Is worth it. That's what I'm saying. I mean, not extremely poor patient, but most.
thank you, sir.
So I just want to add 2 points on a practice point of view. One for especially for the postgraduates, we need not stop ecospirin for surgeries. Like there is a common mistake that we have to stop ecospirin for 5 days and then only we should operate. Otherwise, it increase the bleeding risk. Ecospirin should not be stopped, need not be stopped for surgeries like debridements or amputations. It will not cause increased bleeding, as the studies have shown. One second, all these patients with peripheral arterial disease, one of the most important aspect of them coming to us is pain. So pain relief is very important, and these patients will benefit a hell lot if you put an epidural catheter or some sort of angle block, and then plan all these things. So these things we should always keep in mind: adequate pain relief, for these patients before planning any bypass or angioplasty for that matter? Just adding a point.
Thank you very much, Hari, for that. Siddharth,
Yes,
no
sir.
further questions here. Thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. I learned a lot. It's very, very, very useful. Thank you.
Again, a gentle reminder to all the audience, we have put up the quiz link in the chat box. So all those who have not attended, please try the quiz. So we are coming to the end of today's session. Big thanks to our three speakers, Dr. Binny sir, Dr. Ranjesh and Dr. Hari, for those crisp and informative talks. Unni sir, would you like to give some closing comments, sir?
Yeah, I thought I'll make a few points. Like, for example, just a femoropopliteal block, for that matter, even a single tibial disease never produces critical limb ischemia. It's multifocal. So you should rule out and confirm the iliac and iliac disease as well as the tibial. That's number one. Number two, I feel whenever we do femoropopliteal bypass, the criticality comes when if you rule out upstream and downstream disease, there is always some amount of profunda stenosis. So I always do my proximal with a slit into profunda artery for about 4-5 millimeter. There may be a plaque extension. So FP block with profunda stenosis only will produce critical limb. Both these vessels, if profunda is open, it is going to be a claudicator. That's number one. So all the time, all the aortofem graft also comes as profundoplasty. So even if FP disease progresses, they can keep walking 100 meters, there's no amputation. Then that other thing is, this I learned from one article by Charles Daughter. The surgeon is supposed to have referred for angiogram. And what he has written is visualize but don't fix, because he had started angioplasty. Then what Charles Daughter said was, he knew the problem. He did angiogram, dilated profunda, and gave to the surgeon. Surgeon did FP graft. 6 months later, the FP graft failed, the graft thrombus, but the limb was comfortable. So that I learned some 20 years ago. So every time I am working on the common femoral artery, it's always maybe 1% or 2 where it's very thready vessel or going absolutely backwards, inaccessible, then I leave it. And recently I had a patient who had the entire forefoot, the skin was gone, toe was gangrenous, all tendons exposed. He was unbearable pain. Only vessel was open was profunda. External iliac, CFA, SFA, popliteal, then one small tibial was there. Opposite side, there was stenosis, external iliac artery, tight stenosis. So we put a stent there in the external iliac, did a CFA to profundoplasty. Now he's walking. He needed some skin graft and the toe was removed. So I think a proximal correction is very important and very useful. So I think that's all. Otherwise, Dr. Binny, Ranjesh and Hari has presented the comprehensively difficult disease, but personally I feel now with the things are coming with better angioplasty techniques, and you have to be very diligent and very soft with the catheters. I think angioplasty should be first. Several advantages, because surgery means you have to make a long incision, lot of inflammatory response, and it's going to be tough for the patient to go through. But angioplasty is comparatively simple. You can even use subintimal angioplasty, and that doesn't add any risk. So I think angioplasty should be first. Thank you, Siddharth.
Sir, one question to the whole vascular group. How many of us are doing in situ bypasses here?
I'll answer that question indirectly. See, before you came, Binny, to Srijitra, I requested my chief, Dr. Valiuthan sir, now I'm reading about in situ. I need that valvulotome. So what he said was, you do some 15-20 cases regular, then I'll get you. By the time the literature came, there's hardly any difference between reversed and in situ. And some reports said, because you have to break all the valves, there will be more fibrosis, more thrombosis. So in situ is not necessary to follow. You take the vein delicately, reverse and stitch, you have a wonderful result.
But sir, many people, especially I have few friends at UK, Newcastle, I have a good friend who was my pre-degree classmate. He's doing a lot of in-situ bypass. They have the Lemetrier valvulotome they are using, and incisions are made minimum. Incisions are made minimum, and he said the results are good, extremely good. The cost of Lemetrier valvulotome is 250 pounds, converts to 25,000 in Indian rupees. Probably, I have no experience. I just asked.
So what generally I do is, if you have a reasonably better limb, that is the so-called normal contralateral, I take the leg vein, reverse it, and the incision on the index limb is made like you when you use graft. So you have only minimal 6 centimeter on the groin, 5 or 6 centimeter infra or supragenicular. Use the opposite side limb. In case that gets worse, you can use this limb. That way, the trauma of surgery, the length of incision, the inflammatory response, wound problems, all those things are reduced.
The incision won't be that much different, no, because they have to ligate all the branches.
No, so that is not required. There are people in Chennai, they are doing it regularly. Chennai, there are still.
Then you have to do an angioscopy and get the valve.
Yes.
The branches have to be ligated. Otherwise, how can you do that? So either you have to, angioscopy and then block the branches, or you have to ligate it. Otherwise, you're going to steal all the blood away.
Routinely, they are not doing it.
They ligate only big branches, not everyone.
Routinely, they apply a valvulotome once, then do it. Some amount of leak is there, but routinely they are not doing any angioscopy because angioscopy is a cumbersome procedure.
And what my friend
for
says,
distal bypasses,
Sudhi, what my friend says is that if after you do valvulotome and proximal suturing, if the blood reaches the toe from the angle level, if the pulse pressure blood reaches the toes, it is good. If the blood doesn't reach toe, they go for a repeat valvulotomy or an angioscopy. This is their protocol. That is what they talk.
What they do is after the valvulotomy, they put a catheter, some catheter up the upper side, they flush it with saline, and if it goes a free flow, they will do anastomosis. That's all. That's
the problem is always the anastomosis, no? Because that is what the maximum resistance is. So once you have the resistance, then the blood is just stolen away. The other thing is, when you do an in-situ bypass, the length, distal length, you don't have that much of length because you need to, you know what I mean? You have to sort of, you cannot transpose it. The mobility of the vein is actually very low. So for distal bypass, I really don't know how useful it will be.
But there's advantage, size advantage. There is a
size advantage is there definitely.
Yeah, when we reverse it, you have a smaller.
The smaller one goes distal and the distal one goes. Yeah, that is definitely there.
I mean, that is the only disadvantage of size portion. But you can make the arteriotomy longer. So that you can counteract like that, because there are a lot of disadvantages. At least 2 hours more time. You have to have ligating all these branches, and you make every 3-4 centimeter a fibrotic area. So failure rate, to my mind,
randomized trials haven't shown any difference.
After 6 months, the failure rate is more with in situ, because you make so many cuts, and in the valvulotome there will be fibrosis, and that it's the literature says there is no difference. If you want to use it whichever.
It is technically more demanding. That's a major issue.
Yes, and more time consuming, not beneficial, and long-term results are equivalent.
Sudhi sir, with your permission, can we ask Dayanta Babu sir, seasoned teacher, to add a few comments before we conclude?
Yes, please. Yes,
sure.
I'm sorry about that. Yes, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Vascular Group. It was a wonderful session. Excellent presentations, very crisp presentations. I have learned many things by today's presentations. Especially, it's a daily problem for we general surgeons. Every week, at least 1 or 2 cases here. I would like to know the endovascular where is Dr. Harish working? Before Harish.
Sir, I'm working with
Harish
Dr.
is
Sunil,
not-
sir. I'm in Calicut.
Okay. So your results were impressive. So, but I don't know whether Sir Unikrishnan sir was telling angioplasty first. You were telling endovascular first, and the
Same thing,
surgeons will say bypass first. So I'm really confused which one should be the anyway. Especially the role of endovascular angioplasty for distal is very excellent, and maybe but when we come to practical side, I don't know whether the patients are, especially there will be combination of problems, and how far it is going to help the patient with diabetic foot. That is one issue. Maybe when I send, maybe that patient may not be suitable for endovascular. That patient may not be suitable for, and sometimes may not be suitable for revascularization also. So that is the problem we face.
Sir, can I add one thing about this? In fact, whether we do balloon angioplasty or surgery, there are several risk factors. Patients smoke, diabetes, HbA1c is very high, BP is not controlled. Because of pain, they are not walking. So the best medical management has to be in combination with angioplasty or surgery. Now the surgery has got a few problems in the sense, long surgery, general anesthesia or epidural, cardiac problems will upset you, have mortality trying to save the limb. For angioplasty, if the operator is, gentle and careful, he may achieve more than 90%. There can be some perforation or inability to cross the thing, and it will not be so much stressful for the patient, and there will be some benefit. And one of the groups they asked.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
So thank you, Siddharth. I'll hand over to you.
Yes, sir. So once again, thank you, Sudhindran sir, for moderating the session today. All our speakers for their beautiful talks. Tuni sir and Dayanand Babu sir for your esteemed presence today, and all our participants for coming in good numbers and participating in today's talk. So before we conclude, I just want to quickly put up our next session. So just a sec. Is this visible? Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Your screen is visible, but it's only folders.
Okay. Yeah, so our next, that's the third webinar session. This is visible, isn't it, sir?
Yeah, now it's visible.
So our next session is on the 9th of January. This will be an aortic aneurysm dedicated session. We'll have Neelakandan sir who will moderate the session, and our speakers will be Dr. Chandrasekhar, Dr. Srikumar sir, Dr. Murli Krishna, who's the head of the vascular surgery department at Jayadeva Hospital in Bangalore, and Dr. Shivaneshan, who is head of the department at Sri Chitra Hospital in Trivandrum. So stay tuned for our next session, which is in the 9th of January. So once again, thank you one and all.
What is the time, sir?
It will be at the same time, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Thank you, sir. Can you send me the link also?
Yes, we'll be sending link to all the registrars.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll conclude the session today. Good night, one and all.
Right. Good night, Siddharth.
Right.